All right, let's just dive right in. Today, we're exploring one of the coolest corners of literary history, Edo, Japan. We're going to unravel this totally unique way of seeing the world, a kind of mental alchemy, really, that could turn the most ordinary person into something, well, divine. And believe it or not, it all kicks off with a really, really strange poem. So let's break this down. A servant girl with gilded, kinky hair who rides out on an elephant? I mean, it just sounds like total nonsense, right? A bizarre, kind of crude little verse. But what if I told you this wasn't nonsense at all? What if this was actually a super sophisticated piece of literature, just packed with layers of meaning that someone from 18th century Edo would have gotten in a heartbeat? So that's our mission today. How do you get from a regular kitchen maid to a sacred figure who's riding a white elephant? To figure this out, we have to decode a lost way of thinking, a worldview that connected the sacred and the everyday in ways that feel, well, pretty alien to us now. Okay, so our first clue is all about this servant girl. Turns out, the poem is riffing on a popular urban legend of the time, the story of a household maid named Otake, who, people whispered, was actually a Buddha in disguise. And here's where it gets really interesting. This whole idea of Omichuke being a Buddha, it wasn't pulled out of thin air. It was a direct callback to a much, much older story. We're talking centuries earlier. There were these famous tales, even a whole no play, about a harlot from a town called Eguchi. And in the story, she reveals that she's actually the Bodhisattva Fujin, a divine being whose symbol just happens to be a white elephant. You see the connection, right? A prostitute becomes a bodhisattva. A kitchen maid becomes a Buddha. It's the same pattern. And that is the key right there. For the people of Edo, this wasn't just, ripping off an old story. It was a creative act. They saw the blueprint in the old tale and just applied it to their own time. They looked at the servant girl Otake and saw the harlot of Eguchi. This layering of meaning, seeing the ancient in the now, the divine in the totally mundane, that was the secret art of living in Edo. So how did they do this all the time? Was it just some random cultural tick? Nope. A literary critic, Ishikawa Jun, and his essay is our main source here, he identified a specific set of mental tools that basically powered this entire worldview. He called them conversion devices. And these are the secret code we've been looking for. These are the three big ones, the core concepts that unlock the whole puzzle: mitaté, yatsushi, and zokuka. You can think of them as the cheat codes for Edo literature. First up, mitaté. This is the big one. It's the art of creative substitution. You look at one thing, but you see another. So the servant girl Otake isn't just a servant girl, she is a mitaté, an analog for that legendary harlot of Eguchi. The guy who wants to see her isn't just some random dude, he's a mitaté for the famous monk Saigyo, who met the harlot centuries ago. It creates this awesome double vision. Next, we have yatsushi. This is all about bringing the high and mighty down to earth. A huge, abstract Buddhist idea or a divine being, it's not shown to you on some fancy temple scroll. Nope. It's presented in a yatsushi, a lowly disguise, as a humble, maybe even a little promiscuous servant girl. It makes the sublime totally accessible, relatable, and, yeah, even a little bit scandalous. And last, zokuka. Think of this as the engine that makes it all go viral. This is the process that takes all these complex literary and philosophical ideas and makes them part of everyday street culture. For the people of Edo, a big idea was pretty much useless if it didn't connect to their actual lives. Zokuka is what turned a deep Buddhist doctrine into a racy urban legend about a kitchen maid. Okay, so these conversion devices, they weren't just for folktales. In the late 18th century, a whole group of poets used these exact same techniques to launch one of the most ambitious literary projects you can even imagine. See, these poets, they wrote in a style called kyōka, or mad verse. And they decided they weren't happy just parodying one classic poem here and there. Their goal was way, way bigger. They wanted to take the foundational text of all of Japanese poetry and give it a complete top-to-bottom remix. I mean, just look at the jump in ambition here. The standard way of doing things, honkadori, was to write a new poem that cleverly referenced one famous old poem. But these Tenmei-era kyōka poets, they created an entire anthology that was designed, book for book, to be a complete parody of the most revered imperial anthology from the 10th century, the Kokunshu. It was a total creative takeover. And this just says everything about their philosophy. This was not about individual geniuses showing off their skills. These poets used wild aliases to become anonymous, to just disappear into the work. The goal wasn't to bare their soul or express their inner feelings. It was to contribute to this shared, collective creative game. The art wasn't one poem, the art was the whole network, the movement itself. And they didn't stop with Japanese classics either. They applied the exact same techniques to the great works of Chinese poetry, which every educated person in Edo would have known too. Okay, so listen to this famous Chinese poem from the 8th century. It's beautiful, really somber. It's about a poet who's been exiled, and he's affirming his moral purity and integrity even though he's suffering. Very serious, very noble stuff. Now listen to the Edo-era parody. The structure, it's almost identical. But every single noble image gets flipped into something witty and worldly. The lonely river becomes the bedchamber of a famous courtesan. The pure, untainted heart of ice becomes a smitten heart kept in a jaded verse. The poet completely twisted a story of political exile into a story about a fun night in the pleasure quarters. And this is the absolute genius of it. For an Edo reader who knew the original, the effect must have been electric. You'd laugh at how clever the parody is, but at the exact same moment, you'd feel the sadness and the nobility of that original Chinese poem echoing right behind it. You get to feel both things at once, the wit and the profundity. So what's the big takeaway here? Why was the critic Ishikawa Jun writing about all these obscure literary games in 1943, right in the middle of a world war? What was the point? Ishikawa's essay wasn't just a history lesson. It was a pretty gutsy, coded attack on the literary values of his own time. He believed that modern Japanese literature, with its obsession with realism and the author's personality, had lost something absolutely vital. He was using the Edo period as a mirror to show everyone what had been forgotten. This slide just lays out the whole argument perfectly. Ishikawa said the Edo mind cared about the creative practice, the how. For them, art was a collective movement. The author could be anonymous because the meaning came from this huge shared web of illusion. But he saw the modern mind, which was heavily influenced by the West, as being obsessed with ideology, the what. Art became about the individual work, the author's personality was everything, and meaning was supposed to come from pure self-expression. And so this is Ishikawa's final, brilliant mic drop moment. He says the wind-mad poets of Edo actually succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. They created an art form based on networks, anonymity, and illusion that was so subtle, so different from what came after, that modern critics, who were always looking for an author and a single work, couldn't even see it. It was hiding in plain sight the whole time. Which leaves us with one last kind of wild thought. Today, in our world of memes that layer new meanings onto old images, in our world of song remixes and fanfiction that builds on these massive shared universes, are we, maybe without even realizing it, tapping back into this lost Edo art of mitaté and collective creation? It's something to think about. Thanks for tuning in to The Explainer.